Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Value Stream Show. So, this is actually almost immediately after our last episode. Andrew and I broke off and started talking about the future of value streams and where we see all this going, as we often do, just wander conversationally. And we figured we should have been recording that entire thing. So, we're going to record something that hopefully captures the essence of where we got to, but also we'll see where we make it to in this conversation. But we thought you'd get a lot of value out of this. It's something that we come back to all the time, and we're always thinking about where's all this going, how does this fit into the big picture, and how does this all proceed into the future. So the origins of this was really talking about, how do value streams and value stream management apply to different domains and different areas. And one of them that we tripped over was this idea of the future of organizations, like the structure of organizations, the functions of organizations. And the topic in that domain right now is decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs. Andrew, give us sort of your impression of DAOs, and we can work together to kind of define terms here and kick off this conversation.
Yeah. So this conversation, as you mentioned, is going fairly far afield. We're thinking about this as what's the future of organizations, the future of value stream management, where's this all heading, and so forth. So this is not immediately relevant to our daily work, but this is sort of thinking about how things proceed. So I think about DAOs, just again, distributed autonomous organizations, a term that comes out of the Web3 community, in a progression, right? If we think about the human society, the progression from tribes or family units, where you've got relatively small groups of people working together, accomplishing some goal. That is what we are evolved most naturally to work as, right? We understand relationships with, Dunbar's number 15 other people around us. We can really trust. And so we work very well in that environment where everybody knows who's involved, what are we doing, where are we going, what's the goal, and so forth. But of course, the progression of human society has been into these larger and larger organizations where you can get economies of scale. So you get first, governments and militaries or religious groups, and then certainly over the last few centuries, it's been the rise of corporations and these massive entities that can be far more effective than any small groups of individuals. Of course, one of the costs is there is a slowness and an inefficiency. It's very dehumanizing in a sense, because you're a cog in the wheel. You're playing some small part. You don't really see you don't have much power as an individual. You don't see the broader context in which you're operating necessarily. And so, of course, that has been many centuries in the making. What has been just a few decades in the making is this whole digital transformation thing. And the term digital transformation gets thrown around a lot, but it's worth thinking about the significance and the power of that term. We are saying we want to transform our organizations from non-digital organizations into digital organizations. Transformation, often we use the analogy of like a butterfly, forming a chrysalis, and a caterpillar forming a chrysalis, turning it into a butterfly. We're talking about a very, very, very radical shift. And when we look at digital transformations that do not go well, typically it's because companies didn't really undertake a deep enough transformation, or they didn't coordinate it well enough. So what is a digital organization? I would say a digital organization is one where most every function in that organization is facilitated or augmented by digital technologies. You've got data storage, you've got processing and computation, you've got integrations across systems, user interfaces, and so forth that allow people within the organization to interact with each other primarily digitally. For example, through web conferencing. That's a massive one. You may not have noticed, but you don't talk to people in person these days, and during the pandemic you didn't, certainly. but also interacting with the customers digitally and so forth. And you begin to realize that more and more and more of the body of the corporation, so to speak, is made up of IT systems as opposed to human systems. Now, where's that going? Still, we can say fundamentally the structure of the organization is the human hierarchy, like the org chart and human bureaucracies and so forth. But it's digitally augmented, right? Like a cyborg, cybernetic organization, if you want, as opposed to a cybernetic organism. But a DAO, distributed autonomous organization, is one where all of the interactions are primarily software defined. And so there's human contributions, but the underlying structure of the organization, the laws, the rules, and so forth, are all software defined. And so it works much more like a software application where different people are contributing different aspects. But, and although I find there to be a nauseating amount of greed and hype and so forth around a lot of the Web3 and crypto stuff, there's a kernel of truth there, right? Probably much more than a kernel, right? I think that definitely we are moving to a world where there's something very powerful about a software-defined system. It is incredibly efficient in terms of the economy of exchanging information, storing information, ensuring that processes complete correctly. If I look at my let you all in a dirty secret, right? My email inbox is a whole lot of stuff that goes unanswered, right? Now, if you had a digital system where, the calls were like only 50% of the queries got responded to and so forth, you would have serious concerns about the effectiveness of that system, right? But so there's an inconsistent. Humans are beautiful, right? Our creativity is incredible and so forth, but some of the things that we're trying to accomplish are better accomplished by digital systems, right? Some of the effectiveness of organizations. So that's at least how I see DAOs fitting in. So Steve, do you want to take us back to what is the point of intersection between optimizing a value stream, for example, and moving into this futuristic view?
Yeah, I think that it bears some time and attention to talk about how do we connect the dots between those two things. One of them is a sequence of operations that result in delivery of value to customer and kind of the performance and improvement of that end flow. And where I see that moving is once you understand that flow, you understand where a lot of the waste is. That's kind of one of the first values of value stream management as a practice, is like seeing the waste and measuring the performance of that end-to-end flow, and then being able to target your efforts on, okay, well, there's really no reason why this waste needs to be here. And it'd be great if we could eliminate that waste. We could spend more time doing the things that we find valuable and customers find valuable, even more importantly. And a lot of that stuff is the human creativity, the experience that's provided by all the members of the team, making it easy and less painful for them to kind of contribute and build and deliver and do all their best work. And so, if you go down this road and you're starting to examine your value streams, you measure them, you instrument them, you connect them to all this tooling, all of a sudden, you start to see the organization as this network of intersecting functions. And you start to see the impact of all the individual decisions that need to happen in order to get things done. All of the, the costs of bureaucracy, all the costs of collaboration, primarily like things like consensus or meetings to come to decisions or to figure things out. And that's, often very unproductive. And so, this idea of a software defined, or let's say a programmatically defined organization, it becomes appealing because you can start to think of, okay, well, something I naturally think of when I'm thinking about making optimizations and improvements is, okay, if we spend a lot of time making decisions, how unique are those decisions, right? How often are we just matching, the same outcome that we've seen in the past, right? If criteria X and Y exist, we always choose A, right? And so, do we have to meet about that? Do we have to treat all of these cases as unique snowflakes of decisions, or even take a moment to make those decisions? And how do you structure your organization so that all those decisions and all those interactions can be effective? You start moving into a direction of defining a lot of things so that people can kind of act autonomously and say, I can make certain decisions on my own. A lot of decisions are made for me by platforms and capabilities that I'm leveraging, enabling teams that provide me with services so that I don't have to make decisions. I can go to someone and have them make a decision. Hopefully that's provided easily to me. If we go down that road and we keep moving in that direction, you start thinking about, okay, well, do our organizations need to be entirely unique, entirely invented out of whole cloth? No, they need to be customized and they need to be unique. But part of the reason why we see a lot of folks who are like, oh yeah, Spotify's got a great model. Let's follow the Spotify model. Let's have two pizza teams. There's a lot of things where really, we know what works well. We know good practices. We know things that kind of facilitate the work that we're doing, primarily knowledge work, right? We're discovering these things all the time. And when we discover them and everyone sort of says, oh yeah, that worked for us. And, we tweaked it a little bit, but generally that's how we operate. Kind of doing this work of kind of cloning an operating model across. And so I see DAOs as a way of just kind of making that truly open source and having organizations say, okay, we're going to use this baseline. We're going to tweak some things. And we might push the back upstream and say, like, we changed these things. It worked for us. We're in finance, so our case is a little bit differently. We have some more regulatory concerns, but it's not our secret sauce, right? Our creativity, our business model, our relationship with customers is what really, really matters. The way that we structure people and, a lot of the plumbing of the organization is not a unique differentiator for us. Let's pay it forward and help level up the state of the industry. And we see a lot of that in software and open source. And I think that, value streams and value stream networks bring us in a direction of being able to have those conversations about the plumbing and how the plumbing should be somewhat commoditized, but mostly focused on maximizing the contributions of humans and what they can bring to the table. So I don't know if I've gone too far in the weeds with that, but what's your impression of how we're moving in that direction, Andrew, and like what you see as the appeal of moving in this direction of like defining organizations to a higher degree?
Yeah, it's we're moving from a future, I think, or a state in which organizations use software tools and build software and so forth, to a state where it is a software-defined enterprise, where basically the enterprise itself is defined by software. And that's for anyone who has built large applications or systems, the appeal of that, I think, is immediate and visceral. And I think that's why we see a lot of tech folks trying to found startups and trying to, re-envision what corporations look like, where you have a lot of the processes that are currently done manually, automated. The point that you made about being able to clone a template DAO or organization, whatever, and then customize it and then basically submit a pull request back like, hey, we found this process optimization. Again, if we found this process optimization, other people might benefit from that. Again, if anybody's worked in large open source projects, you realize that's extraordinarily powerful. And in fact, that's already happening. If we look at the individual applications, that are used, we've moved from, building custom content management systems for websites to everybody uses a certain standard set of content management systems and applications, and they just maybe clone them and fork them and tweak them, and there is an incredible economy of scale that is not just at a corporate level, it is at an ecosystem level. I mean, it's a global economy of scale where you're using a package like Linux or the Android kernel or something like that, and then you're building off of that. You take a DAO that is a nice template for a services organization or a whatever organization. You build off of that. That's very, very powerful. And so I would anticipate there would be network effects, of certain template organizations, template DAOs and so forth, that everybody would gravitate towards. At the beginning, it's all, to use Simon Wardley's terminology, it's all sort of wilderness and pioneers and sort of exploring out in the wilderness. But gradually, as we find templates that work, they'll converge with each other, and you'll begin to see this as a more common framework. And change is always risky. Change brings potentially great rewards, potentially brings great risks. So I want to move us into the ethical concerns that might arise with respect to this, but I want to just back up a little bit and think about the idea of an office building, right? For the last few decades, even prior to WeWork and so forth, there's the idea that somebody's built a large building and you can rent an office in that. And there's certain standard templates that every single business needs: a toilet, a sink, a locking door, probably climate control there, some windows, lighting, internet access, right? So why on earth would every business need to figure that stuff out from scratch? Why wouldn't you just rent space in an office building where all of the basic infrastructure that you need for your organization was already taken care of? It makes all the sense in the world. There is this massive economy that you get from that. And so, I'm sure people were worried about that the first time they move into a big office building as opposed to, building it themselves. But, it turns out to be a really, really good idea. So what are the ethical risks that emerge from this? I mean, the first, most obvious one is, you mean you're displacing all the people? You're displacing, human communication, which is the essence of what we do with our organizations. You're gradually moving to a state where all of our jobs are replaced by robots, where gradually all of the things that, we do are automated. I don't know, Steve, initial reactions on that concern?
Yeah. And I mean, this brings us back to the value stream, I think, very nicely, because some folks may be thinking, okay, what does governance and how you structure organizations have to do with value streams? And the origin of value streams come from manufacturing, right? And the constant fear in manufacturing is that you're just going to replace all the humans and with robots, and that is happening. But it happens to undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? It happens to this class of work that could be done automatically. And what happens is it sort of creates opportunities to do things that machines can't do. And we're constantly kind of like one step ahead of the machines that are taking care of the things, right? The robot vacuum replaces the vacuum. And, the thing that I think makes this real and problematic is a couple of cases recently that I've encountered. Actually, yesterday, I heard a story, maybe it was today, of a crypto organization that was, I think they were part of a coin exchange or something, that highly automated operations, and they released a deployment where someone issued a command for a deployment that shut down the entire organization, like basically sealed off access to all of their resources because they were essentially an entirely software defined business. So to do this correctly, you can automate a lot and make just the most consequential activities human driven, but you also have to be using that automation not just to replace people, but support them and make it easier for them to do the right thing and easier to do their best work. And there was another situation that I thought of, but it's escaped me. So hopefully it comes back to me. But what do you think of as like the primary ethical risks here? Do you think we covered the territory? There's a lot to think about. Certainly,
there's a lot to think about. I think the key is not to deny that there are ethical risks, no question, and there are significant concerns. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't move forward. It doesn't mean that things won't inevitably start moving in that direction as people begin to pursue these optimizations. So then you have to think about what kinds of protections can we put in place. So in a lot of ways, you might say that modern organizations are more humane, at least to, but it depends a lot on the worker. And, there's a lot of human rights protections become, more prevalent as well. I mean, there's a sort of massive number of considerations, right? And so the idea that a developer might push a change that would lock everybody else out of the organization, right? The consequences of what we're doing with software are enormous, right? And so ethics training for software developers is critically important. Software developers understanding what they're doing, how it fits into the broader context, figuring out what we can do to build in protections, all of that is critically important. It's something that we can't ignore. Any more than you can ignore it if your job is to be a soldier, right? If your job is to be a soldier, everybody gets trained in the basics of the Geneva Convention and, and so forth. So this is,
One thing that, came to mind, I remembered my case, but I think the one thing that came to mind is, automation and technology provide leverage, right? They allow us to do a lot more with less. And that means that you could destroy a company with a keystroke potentially. You can scale a single message to the entire globe instantaneously. There's enormous power, and of course, enormous responsibility from that. And so the challenge is kind of being in a situation where there's a lot of power or responsibility without support. And I find it, in a lot of organizations that have these capabilities and these high responsibilities for individuals without adequate support, that's where we see things like burnout, where we see challenges of people just being overloaded, constantly fighting fires, dealing with toil and friction. And so certainly, defining things that make it easier for them to do their job and focus on just the most important things, and feel supported in doing those important things, I think is critical. And that's potential that, we're early in developing. The case that I was thinking of where, I think can kind of serve as a model for folks that I really like is GitLab. GitLab is a company that defines almost every aspect of its business, certainly in terms of documentation, right? I mean, anybody can go and look at the operating model of GitLab, and you can see everything from salaries to roles and responsibilities, how to do everything in the company. And there's aspects of that are entirely private, of course, but the vast majority of what they create is open to the public. And, I think that's very powerful for many, many reasons. But I think that, that serves as a very modern model for folks to copy, because it means that if something is publicly visible, that it's to a level of standard, right? I mean, if you can let people into your home, that it's it's presentable to a degree that, maybe your immediate family would put up with a higher level of chaos or disorder. But if you're having an open house, you've probably got things pretty well sorted. I think it drives a level of quality, but it also it invites people to sort of like interrogate it. That's a great thing about open source as well, right? You can go and you can test the system and point out, well, it broke for me here. It's, there's a vulnerability here that we should address. I think we should design things in a specific way, and you can have that evolution be very productive by being open and allow people to participate. So again, to tie this back to value streams, I think a value of a value stream model is that it shows individuals how they fit into a big picture and allows them to kind of see the system as something that's open and visible and defined in data, defined to a degree that they can have an influence. They can almost issue a pull request against the flow of operations and say, well, what if we did things a little bit differently? What if we instituted an SLA here so the delay is time boxed to a degree, or we set some standard around it? And so I see a lot of analogs here, and I see kind of a natural evolution towards DAOs. What are you thinking, Andrew? What's coming to mind? I know there's probably 1,000 thoughts floating around.
I love the GitLab analogy as well. The core of GitLab's product is open source, and then basically all or almost all of their operating model, their corporate strategy, their HR handbook, and so forth, all of that stuff is open source. They say, as you say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I think for a lot of our organizations, we struggle to even understand collectively what is our corporate strategy internally, right? Let alone externally. And as organizations scale, the risk of just not knowing what the heck is going on just increases dramatically. And so GitLab has basically said, yeah, okay, competitors could copy our model, sure, but we believe that we can innovate faster. We believe that we are a more coherent team, more effective team. And if you copy us, no problem. We're working on new stuff all the time. And so it really optimizes for organizational agility as opposed to keeping secrets. Because I really believe when we try to keep secrets as organizations, we end up keeping those secrets from ourselves, and we end up just confusing ourselves. And everybody in the organization gets on different pages, and just the skewing towards secrecy, while it's a natural human tendency, it is the exact opposite of, if you think about value stream optimization coming from lean, right? What is the essence of lean? It is this PDCA cycle, this plan, do, check, adjust cycle, the Shruhart cycle, Deming cycle. So what does that mean? It means that, hey, here's the value stream. Here's how we do work. I've got an idea. I think if we were to do this, it would, reduce the time it takes for us to, complete the whole process by 5%. I have to make that explicitly stated. I have to state that explicitly. My belief, the experiment that I'm running, my hypothesis about the benefit that will come, I carry it out in the open, in public to my team, at least. Mm-hmm. And then if it works, great, we implement it. That's the adjust part. We check, right? Check, did it work? If it worked, we adjust, we implement it. If it didn't work, okay, great. We roll back the change. We adjust back to the way we were, and so forth. And the idea that Toyota just openly giving tours of their factory on an ongoing basis and saying, hey, GM, come on in, take a look at our factory, no problem. We're, and GM's like, well, aren't you afraid we're going to steal your secrets? And Toyota's like, we don't think that you'll actually be successful because we're not sure that you've got the corporate culture to sustain the level of innovation that we're doing here. So copy away, go for it, right? What we would love, as they say, right? If you get better, we all get better. If GitLab, has that attitude, if, GitHub, Bitbucket, whatever else, if they get better, we all get better, right? Somebody rolls out this, we all roll out this, raises the bar for everybody. Who wins? Customers win. That's theoretically, that's why everybody says free market capitalism is such a great idea, right? Because everybody, there's competition makes everybody better. In reality, vast majority of companies don't really want free market capitalism. They want monopoly, right?
Right.
And they want to hide the competitive secrets. They don't want competition, right? They want monopoly, right? So this fundamentally anti-competitive. So I guess just because we could talk about this forever, but the one thing that I wanted to bring forward about this ethical concern is looking at optimization in natural systems, that all natural systems optimize themselves. Again, a big fan of this book, Scale by Geoffrey West, but talks about the optimization of our, the circulatory system, optimization of cities and corporations and these kinds of things. The difference, though, between the optimization that's happening right now and the optimization that happens in nature is the optimization that happens in nature has been proven out over millions of years, and therefore whatever externalities come from something, there's time for the system to adjust to those externalities. If you have a hyper efficient system, but it poisons itself and poisons the ecosystem around it, of course, it dies. It doesn't survive. And that's where we're at today, right? Humans are optimizing everything, but we're doing so in such a way that's undermining the substrate on which we all depend, the ecological substrate, so forth, so that there are these enormous existential risks by us getting better and better and better. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be looking at this micro scale about how to make the system of work more humane and more effective. It means we need to be looking at this micro scale and at the macro scale. What are the externalities that we're pumping out as a company, as a team? What do we have the right protections in place? Are we policing ourselves? And being out in the open like GitLab is, it invites external scrutiny and criticism as well, right? If there's something that attracts external criticism, whether from investors or employees or other folks, the company has to deal with the consequences of that faster, and that is really part of the DevOps spirit. Like, get fast feedback and deal with it early when you first see the signs of risk coming out.
Right. And that's kind of like the nature of agility, right? Is like striving for the fastest possible feedback so that you can respond as quickly as possible. I think that, when we're talking about another hidden advantage of this approach is like, if you're very open with what you're doing, even if it's selective, you're going to have folks try to copy you because they're going to try to take a shortcut to where you are. And that often has disastrous consequences, right? I mean, you really can't copy anything that's truly differentiating because it's unique to a context, right? It's unique to your experience, your capabilities, your structure, your architecture, all kinds of things. And so, we've seen this with Spotify, but to bring it back to the office, right? We saw so many companies adopt the open office plan and see all of their workers constantly distracted and interrupted and unable to work, which has spawned this, a whole faction of individuals who they feel like they can only get work done when they're at home. And, so we're seeing all this parallel all over the place now, right? This idea of what is the correct amount of centralization and decentralization, openness and closed, public and private, automation and creativity, commoditization and genesis or invention. And I think that there's a lot to talk about here. We will revisit this, I'm sure, many, many different times from different angles. But hopefully, you've all found this thought-provoking. Let us know, about how you feel about these sessions where we look at the boundaries and the intersections of value streams and ideas and how we see that context in the bigger picture. Because we always think of, as big a picture as possible and try to make it real for individuals wherever possible. But let us know what you think, and let us know your predictions about the future of work and and automation and collaboration and all that stuff that we're really interested in here.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you. See you next time.